All right, thanks for joining us today. This is our first session of our four-part business development series. I'm PWSA's Industry Relations Manager, Julie Ashola. This series was developed with businesses, property owners, developers, consultants, contractors in mind. And the sessions will focus on different aspects of PWSA that are common touch points, such as stormwater, permitting, dye testing, backflow, prevention and conservation, and lastly, procurement and contracting. So throughout this series, we're going to have reps from our development team, our customer service team, our stormwater team, and finance. So we'll be giving you direct access and insight to how we approach these processes and requirements. So feel free to sign up for all of the sessions, a couple of the sessions, whatever fits your specific business and your focus. So we would also like to grow and develop this series into an annual series and hopefully in person at some point. So if there are any processes that remain a mystery to you, such as billing or dispatch, anything like that, let us know and we can kind of build out these sessions to meet the needs of the business community. So today's session is going to focus on all things stormwater, including the new Stormwater Fee, the credit application process, the new stormwater ordinance, and our stormwater master plan. So we have our sustainability coordinator, James Stitt, here today. He's going to present to you all, and we want this to be a collaborative session. So we don't want you to leave with any unanswered questions. So jump in the chat, raise your hand, and we'll let you ask questions whenever you feel like. But we'll also have time at the end to do some Q&A. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to James.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, so I'm the sustainability manager here at PWSA and have been working on this stormwater stuff for pretty much most of my career here, the last 10 plus years since I started at PWSA. Much of what we've accomplished up to this point, is built on everything we've done, the prior year and has evolved into a pretty robust program. So let me just get into my slides here. I'll start sharing my screen and then we can go from there. All right, have you got my presentation slides up? Okay. So what we'll talk about today is, as Julie said, all things stormwater, at least from PWSA's standpoint and perspective. Talk a little bit about why it matters to us and to property owners and developers out there, as well as what PWSA's strategic plan is shaping up to be and what we're looking at and expectations of that for future. The stormwater fee, I'll briefly go over that, and we'll talk about the credit program that's available, as well as then we'll close it out with some information on the updated stormwater codes that we worked with the city planning department and zoning and PLI to develop some new stormwater codes for the city of Pittsburgh that just took effect just a little over a month ago. So why does this matter at all? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, and most folks either anecdotally are aware of this, or a lot of you folks who are in the sort of water world engineering part of it know that we've gotten a lot more rain and a lot more severe storms over the last several decades, and it's been progressively getting worse. This is not just related to Pittsburgh, but it's sort of a regional thing here in the Northeast United States, where we're looking at much greater heavy precipitation rates than we've had in the past. Just recording the severe storms at the Allegheny County Airport. You can see here on this chart in the 1950s, the number of days we had was, pretty much down there in the low teens per year. Whereas now we're, looking at, 10 or so of these heavy storms per month on average. in more recent years. This is the heavy storms that are those large cloud bursts with heavy thunder and lightning, wind, hail, and tornado force winds. So it's not necessarily the amount of rain, but just how it's hitting us is changing significantly. The amount of rain we get is pretty much staying on the average of about that 38 to 40 inches per year. We've had a couple of really banner years recently, and it is slightly creeping up. But when we look at those highly localized storms that are those big heavy cloud bursts that dump, an inch of rain in 15 minutes and 4 inches of rain in 2 hours, those kinds of storms are what really overwhelm our system. And our systems were not typically built with those considerations in mind when they were built a long time ago. So we get too much stormwater in the system and it has to go somewhere. And as you saw in that last photo, it goes out into the rivers and waterways as combined sewage overflows. Most of our system, as I said, is not designed for those sorts of capacities. Steady rain, light rain storms that are, all day, light rains, we can handle that. The storm system does pretty well. However, those gully washers that we get was not in the consideration of the design and construction. Much of the system we have was built back when, as you see in this photo here, men wore hats and child labor laws were, less significant. So we have a system that's relatively old, but it does work for what it needs to do, except on those heavy rain events. So we need to do something a little more to get those heavy rain events under control. And that requires, a little more of a strategic approach to this stormwater issue and looking at it from a holistic perspective that we can apply to the whole city, as opposed to just sort of like waiting for something to flood and then going out and trying to fix that area, then waiting, to hear where the next complaint comes from and then trying to fix that area. So what we're trying to do is build innovative stormwater management projects that will not only address the individual local issues that our neighborhood or a particular street is facing, but are integrated and connected throughout a network of the city that then helps to mitigate the water getting into the sewer network that we have that's underground. So things like what you see here in this photo of this curb bump out with the swale and the rain gardens that manage this water before it gets to the downstream inlets. The strategic plan has evolved over the last several years as different changes in environmental regulations have taken place and come into play. The major one being, of course, Alcosan's consent order with the EPA to mitigate the combined sewer overflows into the main rivers. And this has caused us to, sort of go back and reevaluate the Green First plan and the citywide plans that we've had in place for the stormwater to make sure that we were in alignment with what Alcosan is now going to be sort of required by the federal regulators to do, which is a large tunnel and conveyance program to get that stormwater into some sort of holding pattern while the plant can be rebuilt and expanded to manage the stormwater for treatment. So some of the priorities that we're focusing on for our particular piece of the stormwater strategy is water quality and improving our streams and rivers to make them more adaptable to wildlife and recreation. So mitigating the combined sewer overflows to these areas, managing our MS4 program so that those dedicated stormwater outfalls are not only keeping up with the current code, but are for water quality, but then the volume of those areas flows to those areas is not damaging the waterways with high levels of erosion and sedimentation. Flooding for problems associated with basement backups and localized street flooding is our main concern. Riverine flooding is a much larger issue that is something that we'll hopefully have some benefits by focusing higher up in the watershed on keeping the water out of the system so it doesn't get to the rivers in the first place. Equity and opportunity, targeting areas throughout the city where these investments could have the most impact. I don't think it's any secret that, the places where the flooding occurs, the places where the most water gathers and causes the most damage are typically the lesser invested in communities and areas that need the help the most. That's why the land is cheap and there's not a lot of investment going on there, is because, well, those areas flood. So hopefully we can balance that out with a more equitable investments in these areas and create more opportunities so that these green spaces and investments we do with these projects will also stimulate further investment and development in these areas, so that people will want to stay there, want to continue to live there, and hopefully want to grow in those particular neighborhoods. So we're looking for ways to leverage that investment through all the partners that we can possibly get our hands on through this, because we cannot manage the stormwater that we're getting by just investing in the public right-of-ways and in the public properties. We need partnerships with private property owners to manage the stormwater throughout, whether that be working with the city with the parks, working with other private property owners with how they do their development plans, and infill, et cetera. All those sorts of things are on the table for us, because when it comes right down to it, stormwater management is a land use issue. And we only have control over land use in a very limited part of the city. The rest of that is under private control. So we're hoping to leverage what we can do in the streets and the right-of-ways with what the development community and architects and designers and engineers are doing on the private side of that property line. And trying to connect our stormwater infrastructure to other investments. Stormwater is something that impacts all other parts of the infrastructure that we have, whether it be energy or transportation, and making sure that we are working in alignment with the developments and the innovations on that side is crucial to us being able to take most and best advantage of our investments and making those investments have longer term returns for long-term projects that, as you know, most of the water and sewer system infrastructure is not something that we build on a 2, 3, 5-year plan. It's built on a 25, 50, 100-year plan. So we look to try and make sure that that money gets spent right the first time and will last. Some of the projects that we've done and that are in the strategic plan you can see here are pretty well spread out across the footprint of the city. There are some neighborhoods that we haven't quite gotten to yet, but there's 15 projects completed, 9 in construction, and 7 more in planning. That was as of the end of last year. So several of these ones that are in planning have now moved to construction, that we've hit the construction season, and there's a whole new slate of planning that's going on for new projects in this part of this strategic plan for the stormwater projects that we have in various areas of the city. Projects that are completed, these are the sorts of things we're looking to do and hope to do more of. Where this Heron Hill project was a city-owned property that was kind of an oddball triangular shaped parcel that was not big enough to do any development on, but was a large grass area that would get some flowers planted in it by the community groups and the WPC and every spring. And we realized that there's a lot of water coming down Heron Hill and Center Avenue, and we were able to turn this into a long linear bioswale with capture areas underneath that functions very well and helps keep about 1 million gallons of water out of the combined sewer system during those heavy rainfall events And this was when it was first planted. Right now, it is 2 years into its growth cycle and has filled out quite nicely. You would never know what's underneath here, and that there's capacity for that sort of level of water detainment right there in this small parcel. And another one is a larger scale neighborhood project in Maryland Avenue, Shadyside, where we are incorporating the stormwater management into the street and putting large linear underground containment in the parking lane of the street with pervious pavers over top. In some of the parts of the neighborhoods, we're even working with the property owners to disconnect downspouts and bring their stormwater from their property out to these systems so that it doesn't go directly into the sewer system, where it would then mix with the sewage and create higher risk of basement backups as well as combined sewer overflows. So this plan is something that is being reevaluated now and is in the first phase, which will be completed in June of this year. It contains a large component of public engagement, so we can get the input from residents and business owners and the designers and engineers and property managers and developers across the city and the area, so that we can make sure that we're addressing all the issues and concerns in a way that, you know, will help benefit not only us, but benefit the people that have to then, you know, sort of implement things on their properties. And we are definitely, you know, paying special attention to these environmental justice areas, as they are typically the ones, as I mentioned, who, you know, water runs downhill, and when it gets down there, there's nowhere else for it to go. Those are the folks that are paying the price for the developments that, you know, often occur upstream, that are just, you know, sort of taking the water away from their property, putting it in the pipe and letting it go somewhere else. When it gets to that somewhere else place, it's often unmanageable at that point and causes greater issues for the folks that have to live there. You can find more information on that at our website, on the master plan website at pgh20.com. There's plenty of other info there, and there will be phase 2 of this plan, which will be starting after June and will include developing levels of service for the various watersheds across the city and more specific project types as well as project locations that will be then further fleshed out and put into the queue for planning, development, and construction.
And James, excuse me, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're currently seeking ambassadors to participate in that strategic planning, correct?
Yeah, as far as I know, that's a good question for either Beth or Tony as to what their list looks like, or if they've got a full list, or if they're still looking. I'm not sure where they stand on that. But it's certainly, if anybody on this call is interested, they can certainly get a hold of either you or I, and we'll put them to the right person and get them in the right direction.
Great, thanks.
So all of this, of course, costs money, and we've got to pay for it some way. And we have been paying for all of our stormwater programs and projects through the revenues collected by our, that we collect from the ratepayers. But that was not necessarily a good representation of the cost of stormwater and the impact of stormwater and who was actually paying for it and how we were collecting the funds. Until just recently, all of our billing was done by the water meter and what the water meter reading was. And you would pay for your water based off of how much you consumed at the faucet. And we then take that number and say, well, if you consume that much, then this much must be going down the drain. So here's your sewer conveyance charge. But that sewer conveyance charge had baked into it also the stormwater conveyance and the stormwater management charges, which really didn't make sense because, stormwater isn't tied in any way to how much water you drink or consume at the faucets. So we decided that there was a better way to do this. It's actually a way that over 2,000 other communities in this country have done it, and that is to have a dedicated stormwater fee that is based on impervious area. Every parcel in the city has been mapped, and we took quite a long time to create a overlay of all the impervious areas across the city on all parcels that are in the city. Even if a parcel did not have a water meter, they will now be obliged to pay the stormwater fee, because we will be sending billing out based on the impervious area for stormwater, and that is generated by the property ownership and parcel identification numbers that we have from the county. So much more fair and equitable way of billing for stormwater. In the past, if a large warehouse with a big parking lot for trucks and things, maybe had a small bathroom for their workers and a shower or locker room, didn't have a big water use footprint, but has a large impervious area footprint, they would pay relatively little amount for stormwater management, but we're contributing significantly to the problem. So as you can see here in this photo, the blue highlighted areas of the aerial view on our stormwater impervious area map shows all the impervious areas that are associated with this given property outlined in the yellow property line. And, depending on their water use in previous billing structure, they may or may not have paid their fair share. So at least this way, their fair share of stormwater now will be calculated based on that impervious area square footage of their roofs, driveways, parking lots, sidewalks, and the places where water, does not get absorbed into the ground, but rather runs off into the sewer system and has to be then managed further downstream. We have on PWSA Stormwater website the fee finder map, where you can actually pull up the map of the city that looks like this, and put in your address, see and find your properties, and get the calculation of the impervious area and see what we've got there. This was done off of available aerial data. So if there are new properties or properties have changed within the last year and a half, we probably would need to update some things, but we have a process in place where we're doing that, and we do have 2021 data that is being uploaded into our system now. So those will be online here very soon. But there's a link to the fee finder here in the slide that will provide these slides to everybody at the end, and you can get these links as well from our website, pgh2o.com. The fee itself is based on an equivalent residential unit, or an ERU. When we did our analysis, we found that the average residential property across the city had about 1,650 square feet of impervious area. So we sort of picked that number since it made sense to be our equivalent residential unit, and then calculated 3 tiers for the residential fee, where we wanted to be fair to the folks who had a really tiny house over on the south side, little row house that it was relatively small in those very dense neighborhoods. They should not have to pay as much for stormwater as a larger house in Highland Park or Squirrel Hill that had significant areas of imperviousness. So created 3 tiers for the residential. The non-residential is based off of the total square footage of imperviousness. We didn't do that for the residential just because there's too many, and there would be too many numbers and variables in place to calculate every single property per square foot. So that's why the tier system was put in place for those 3 tiers on residential. Non-residential, though, did make more sense and was more beneficial and logistically conceivable for us to do it based on the ERU. So in this diagram here, you see single family residence. That's 1 ERU. The parcel on the right of the image is a non-residential business parcel where there's a large building and a bigger parking lot that would be 5 ERUs. So the parking lot and building may total up to 8,250 square feet. That's 5 total ERUs when you do the math. So they would be paying 5 times the ERU rate, which our current rates right now are $5.96 for the full ERU. So that parcel back there with the 5 would pay 5 times that $5.96. And you see here also the residential rates on how they break out in multiples of either a half an ERU or the double ERU for the larger parcels. There will be an increase that PUC has already improved our rates for the first 2 years of this. The increase in 2023 is shown here and will be based on the 795 ERU rate. So what are we going to do with this money? How does PWSA plan on spending these funds? A big part of it will go to the capital cost, the design and construction for some of those projects that I showed you on that list earlier. And helping to fund these capital projects to get them off the ground so we can get the bonds and the financing that we need to move them forward. Another big part of it is the day-to-day maintenance and the direct costs associated with the stormwater system. We have, what is it, 1,200, I think, or no, I'm sorry. Yeah, 1,200 miles close to of sewer systems and 25,000 catch basins and inlets that feed water into those systems. So just keeping up on keeping the leaves and debris and making sure those catch basins are open and flowing to the system is monumental and takes a lot of effort and funds to do that. Then there's the weeding and maintenance of the rain gardens and the green infrastructure and the extensive maintenance that those take that will all help us meet our state and federal water quality requirements for the streams and rivers and the discharges we have. Then there's also some portion of it that will go to the indirect costs, which are the shared functions that we have from administrative costs at the main offices and legal and the business development and all those sorts of things that are associated with that, get some portion of that distributed to them. Now, there are ways to offset the stormwater fees for properties. We created a credit program for property owners to incentivize them to try and do more on their property to manage the runoff. And there are a couple of ways that you can reduce that fee. One, just right off the bat, is reduce the impervious area. The fee is based on how much impervious area there is on a site. So if you've got a large parking lot that maybe don't need all those parking spaces anymore because half of your half of your team is working from home now, then convert that parking lot back to a pervious area by just taking up the asphalt and making it a green space, and that would then reduce your fee by we would recalculate the amount of impervious area and then that would get a fee reduction. The other way is to manage the runoff from those areas. So that half of the parking lot, maybe you can't get rid of it, but you can manage half of that parking lot. So there's ways to reduce your fee by doing that. Residential customers have some avenues here as well by disconnecting downspouts, but there is a significant hurdle there of 3/4 of an inch runoff from the impervious surfaces on residential need to be managed, which in the city and the more denser neighborhoods may not have the yard space or the area to get the water, that much water into containment and detainment for the requirements there. So take a close look at that if you're thinking about that for residentials. The non-res, the property needs to meet the City of Pittsburgh's 2019 or 2016 stormwater codes, and we have 2 different standards for that. So even if your property was constructed prior to 2016 and some other code that did not require as much stormwater management on site, you can get a credit by bringing the property up to that code for stormwater, and those requirements are bring it up to the 2019 standard and capturing 1 inch from the 24-hour rainstorm. So that first 1 inch that falls on all the impervious surfaces, and you'll get a 60% credit off of the tributary impervious area. So if you have a 1 acre parking lot and you're able to capture half of the acre, you get a 60% credit on that half of acre of impervious area, not for the whole parking lot, but for the portion that is tributary to the capture and detention BMP. So if it's the 2016 standard is capturing the first 3/4 of an inch, and then you would get a 45% credit for that tributary area. So those are good ways to help sort of offset some of these stormwater fees and the credit program that we have. We've already started getting applications for these credits. We have a credit manual that's on our website that details how to go through the process of getting the credit. It's pretty straightforward. I think the manual is only about 15 or 18 pages, and most of that is the actual application itself, where it just describes each of the fields that needs to be filled out. There's a way to do it online, as well as you can print a PDF of it and do it the old-fashioned way and just mail it in. Talking to our engineers that review the applications now, we've gotten about 40 or 45 of them so far. The biggest thing they're seeing and the biggest error they're encountering so far is incomplete applications. People just aren't taking the time to fill them out in full. We need all the information before we can get to the approval process. So please make sure that all the information is there. I mean, we've got some that are coming in with, they don't even have addresses for the parcels and stuff like that. So it's really difficult to figure out who's even applying for the credit or where it's supposed to go when we get some of these. And provide as much detail as possible. If you've got detailed drawing and design details for your BMPs, the stormwater site plans, the calculations from the construction reports and inspection reports on the capacities for the BMPs, O&M plans. O&M is a big part of this whole process. I'll talk about that in a little bit too. So make sure you provide as much detail as you can to provide the backup documentation for us to evaluate the credit application. We may ask for an on-site inspection just to verify that the BMP is functioning properly and is what the design plans originally said it was. And during the credit period, we may also request a site visit at any time to come out and make sure that it is still operating as intended. And that it's still there. If perhaps property changes hands or something, new property owners may make alterations and such that would affect that credit. Just to be clear too, code compliance, regardless of when the property was constructed, does not automatically equal credit approval. The credits are applied for and evaluated separately from any regulatory requirements. So if you've got, the thought that you're going to, they need to apply for a credit, please get that application filled out in full. And just because you met code compliance does not necessarily mean that that credit will be automatically approved. We do have to double check and evaluate, because code compliance is often looking at the overall peak flows, pre and post construction, whereas the stormwater fee is an impervious area runoff calculation for the detention and retention that is on site currently. So a little different calculations, but somewhat related. The credits are good for 3 years. At the end of the 3-year period, the owner can request an extension on that and sign up for another 3 years on the credit. And again, a slight review or maybe a site visit would be required there. And PWSA can terminate the credit at any time if we find that the BMP is improperly maintained or not adequately functioning. As I mentioned earlier, O&M is very important to these things, and very important that they continue to work and perform as they were designed. not only so you can continue to get your credit, but also so that we can continue to benefit from that water not getting into the sewer system and causing further problems either downstream or on that particular site itself. And so with that, I will move into talk about the city's stormwater code and the updates that were recently made to that as a joint project that we had with the city planning office, PLI, and the folks over there in zoning and legal. The code update process that we went through was pretty robust. I'll talk a little bit about the new code and the old code, some of the regulations that you'll be seeing for the first time, and there's some changes in the application and review process as well. We have a brand new design manual that is a companion piece to the code that I think will be a great benefit to the design and development community and engineers working on these projects out there and trying to make the compliance with the code changes. So yeah, how did we get here? Well, this stormwater problem has not changed and has changed. It's gotten worse over the years. Even in the 10 years that I've been working here on this, I've seen significant changes in how these storms are impacting us. And as I said earlier, this is not something that we can do by ourselves. It's something that we need a lot of partnerships and cooperation and good relationships with various groups and agencies, public and private. So to change the stormwater code, we didn't want to just go through and wholesale make sort of the changes on our own and hope that everybody was happy with it when we were done. So we embarked on a over two year public engagement and legislative process that involved the city, PWSA, the County Conservation District, the Health Department, even talked to the DEP to get their input on what good code would look like and what was needed from the code, essentially what we could do to make the code better and also to make it impactful for future development going forward. So we had three main groups, which were the agency working group that was sort of the internal folks that sort of manage and handle and enforce the code. We developed a stakeholder group of developers, engineers, and designers, and property owners and property managers who helped inform our decisions on, sort of what impacts code changes would have for them. And then we also had, resident and business groups that we engaged with on a regular basis to keep them in the loop and get their concerns about, sort of what this code would look like and how it would impact them. The code did go through extensive reviews and the entire legal process with 2 visits to the Planning Commission to get their final approvals, the whole City Council hearing process with many rounds of pre and post agenda meetings with all the members of council to make sure that we were in alignment with what they wanted and were hearing from their constituents. Finally, I got the approval for the code in October of 2021, and it did take full effect on March 31st of this year. The new code does have some changes over the old code, and what we see there is that the stormwater related regulations have all been moved to Title 13. One of the big things that we heard from a lot of people was that, stormwater codes were kind of strewn about Title 13, Title 9, Title 10, some in Title 4, and, so it was like, how do we know which one to follow? And, there's some confusion and some definitions. Things were different in different titles. So we tried to eliminate that and get it all under one title so it's all in one place. The other big change is that we incorporated climate change projection models for the calculations for BMP design. So we're not just using historic data on rainfall to inform the calculations on, the sizing for projects. What we're doing now is we've projected a future rainfall sort of data set that is input into the calculations for BMP design, so that we're not designing stormwater management techniques for rainfall we're getting today. We want to design the stormwater management techniques that are going to be in place 20, 25 years from now, that are going to be hopefully effective for the rainfalls that we're projecting in those climate models. There's a public health and safety release rates in certain watersheds. Talk a little bit more about that. And then two-step approval process is something new and something that's different now too. So one of the key changes is that climate change projection. What we did is we worked with the information provided by Carnegie Mellon and the RAND Corporation, who downsampled larger scale regional climate models and climate projections from the IPCC, and we have been able to calculate sort of a climate projection for the city of Pittsburgh all the way out to the year 2100. And what we found is that, just by looking at, the historic data, we talked about the rainfall storms that are the heavy rainfall storms that are happening more frequently and are getting more intense, but we're also seeing a total annual rainfall increase, as you can see on this chart here, that is related to those climate change information. The public health and safety release rates, we already deal with these in the Act 167 requirements that the county had in place, which are the blue outlined watersheds that you see here on this map. So we also, in our analysis, were able to determine that there's additional watersheds in the city of Pittsburgh that have significant issues of flooding and high levels of complaints, and the hydraulic capacity of our system is really limited. So we felt that those areas were also in need of a little more regulation on the release rates for these very strained watersheds. So we added a few, and some of them even overlap, as you can see here on the map, but the big ones are the A22 and A42 East End watersheds. The new regulations themselves, they are available online as well, and now in place at the city. When we look at the duration, the rainfall standards for the return year period on the standard storms, we've updated the NOAA recommendations. I don't have the old numbers here, but these are the new numbers based off of the climate change projections from Carnegie Mellon and RAND. And when you look at the comparison, the old NOAA Atlas 14 rainfalls are, they're close at the 1 and 2 year level, but 5, 10, 25, the future rainfall depths are the ½ inch and then almost a full inch above. At the 50 and 100 year level, they're pushing the 2 inches higher on that full depth for those extended periods there. So we'll be applying these numbers in our calculations on the new code standard, as opposed to the old numbers, which were based off of historic data. So that volume control change when we add that climate change in there, it boosts up the 95th percentile storm to be in coordinated with the projections for the year 2100 for all activities, and hopefully that is designed to improve the water quality in the streams and rivers. And those rate controls, the peak flow rate for the post-development, will look at the 2100 future climate change projection rainfalls that I just showed you, and that those are not to exceed the flow rates for pre-development that were calculated with the Atlas 14 historic data. So pre-development, you're going to use the old numbers looking at the historic data. Post-development, you're going to use the new numbers looking at the future data. So hopefully that will eliminate some of the public health and safety issues with downstream flooding by increasing the amount of stormwater that is required. Whoops, go back down. That is required to be held on site and detained. So the design storm sizing, you look at the 95th percentile storm was just under 1.5 inches before. Our new projection, when we average out through the year 2100, is going to be 1.66 inches for the 95th percentile storm. So that's about a little more than 10% increase. There are benefits that we've included in the new code that offer some flexibility for development, and especially when you're looking at infill and some of these more constrained property sites. We have a volume control offset option that gives you the flexibility to use stormwater management on a different site to meet your regulatory requirements for the current proposed construction site. So in the examples here on the right, you see, that either needs to be on the same property within, sort of a single development, or it could be on a different property as long as it's in the same sewer shed. So that we're managing the water within the same sewer shed and affecting the impact on that same sewer shed. So here we have the yellow proposed building of 3,500 square feet with new parking of 1,500 square feet, but maybe there's nowhere to put stormwater management on that site because of the constraints of neighboring properties and other geotech or whatever. But the building right next door is the same owner, same property owner, does have a significant area where a rain garden could be put in to manage the stormwater off of 5,000 additional square feet from that building. This would have to be, of course, above and beyond what it was already managing for itself and the code requirements that were in place when it was constructed. But if you can manage that additional 5,000 feet, then that proposed building there in the yellow and the parking would be able to take advantage of that water being managed next door as opposed to being managed directly from that property. Same thing with the multi-property. If it's down the street or in a similar way. As long as it's in the same watershed, you can take advantage of this offset by managing extra water from one property to cover the water that needs to be managed with another that can't do so. More details on that in section 2 of the design manual, and hopefully that is something that people can start taking advantage of on some of these projects where we've got dense infill going on that make it difficult to get the proper stormwater management that's needed. Some other limitations that are new are infiltration testing and BMP siting. There's some details on when and where you can infiltrate based off of the landslide prone districts overlays and steep slopes, the proximity to development, and historical sites, as well as undermined areas. So there are significant changes to that as far as the limitations for infiltration. Doesn't mean you still can't do subsurface or underground detention. Those areas would just have to be lined or some other way that would not cause infiltration. The fee in lieu fee of managing stormwater is changing as well. The burden of demonstrating that it's infeasible, it has been increased and more clearly defined. In the past, it was just sort of, have your engineer tell us that you can't do it, and we'll review it at the city and decide what it is. Now there's a much more robust checklist of items that you can go through to really help the evaluations be more clear and transparent, so that we can get to a point where we've exhausted every possibility before we finally say, okay, it's just infeasible to do the stormwater management on that site and pay the in lieu fee instead. The application review process has changed somewhat. Everything is now in the one-stop PGH site and will be managed through that. It is now a 2-step process for the stormwater management plan approvals. You can get expedited reviews for those who are interested in moving the project quickly by using some of the preferred practices and the low impact development BMPs. PLI has a new stormwater permit, and PLI will be implementing a more robust stormwater inspection program. The application process still follows a similar flow as it did before, based off of the square footage of the area of disturbance, or whether it's new or additional construction. And you need to be very clear on which agencies you need to apply to for the various permits and approvals that you need, whether it's the city, the county conservation district, and these are not this doesn't include the tap-in permits or the other reviews that you need to engage with PWSA on. This is just the city process here. The PLI permit is something that's new for any new construction, and you apply through that with one stop, and the fee is based on the BMP construction. You can go to PLI and get the information on that. And it is something that goes in concurrently with your stormwater management plan application process, which is now a two-step process. The first step is a conceptual stormwater management plan, where you would meet with the environmental planner and submit your conceptual plan for the site stormwater management. This would happen probably sometime after you met with PWSA's. We have our early sort of pre-development meetings, so that you start to get an idea of what you're going to be doing on the site and where the stormwater is going to go, so that we can begin to look at how this concept would fit in with the overall stormwater strategy for that neighborhood, for that sewer shed, as well as the overall development in that neighborhood. And then once that's approved, goes back for final design, development, and the final stormwater management site plan would be submitted then once those were completed and submitted to the city. PWSA is working on, we work with the city. City does sort of the administrative reviews of these management plans. PWSA's engineering team supports the city by doing the technical reviews in these. So that may change in the future, but until the city has the staff and resources to handle this sort of work, we will be continuing to do this process. And that process here is a little more details on that. I'm not going to go through all of these with you here today. It's just a sort of a step-by-step to take you through it. The phase one conceptual review is typically a 15-day turnaround period. It's pretty quick. Doesn't need to be a whole lot more than, like I said, it's just conceptual to get an idea of what the overall plan is before anything has been, before a whole lot of money has been spent on and commitment made to some of these BMPs. And then the actual stormwater management site plan review is the second phase, when things are more fleshed out, and is what you're typically used to doing here. And this is a 45-day review period that would be an iterative process with the folks at city planning and PLI. That's the city's appeals process that is in place for any issues that may come up with getting the approvals or not getting the approvals, as the case may be. PLI will now be doing stormwater inspections, and whether that's with PWSA teams supporting them on that, or PLI's own stormwater inspectors, there will be 3 inspections that they'll be requiring for the BMPs for these stormwater management facilities. pre-construction, underground, and then final. And this is burden is on the permit holder to request these inspections and get them scheduled for the appropriate times. The design manual is another new thing that we have now, and this was created as a companion piece for the new city code. I encourage you all to download this, put it on your computers, whatever, but definitely go through this and review it. It explains in great detail a lot of these code changes that I've gone through here very quickly, and gives you a whole host of information on how to address the different variables that you may find on your sites and in your plans to meet the new codes. It is a supplement that we will update and change throughout over time. A lot of things in the actual code language were written to say basically like, as per the design manual, you'll be required to do this, or to meet this requirement, fill out the calculation in the design manual and put in your numbers. So the design manual is a living document, but it's designed to be a tool that you can use on every project, and I hope that you will, so that you can better be informed and meet the requirements of the code. The list of the table of contents for it, goes through the stormwater management requirements, how to keep the site management into your, stormwater management into the site design, and some BMP design standards that we've sort of pre-canned, and what those standards would be. We're not necessarily saying use this particular technology, but design standards and such that, if it has this much tributary square footage of impervious area, it needs to have X, Y, Z of, detainment capacity and flow through and, hydraulic loading, etc. The plan review requirements are detailed out in there. There is some construction guidance on how to make sure that these things are constructed properly. Getting them on the paper and in the plans is one thing, but making sure that the construction is done according to that is another thing. And then the last thing is operations and maintenance. The importance of that can't be understated, that these things, once they're built, they will need continued operation and maintenance to keep them going and operating to the calculated specs that they were designed. So some good information there on how to keep that O&M going over time with the proper planning and requirements for that. Some of the resources that are available now that were not readily available in the past are things like this stormwater map that the city has developed with open source data, and includes a whole host of layers on the Act 167 watersheds, the peak rate flow watersheds that the city now has there in green. You can click on any one of those watersheds and see, sort of what the requirements are for that watershed, and what's you put in your address, you can see what watershed you're in, where you're located, does it tributary to any impaired waters, what are the the overlay districts for the RIV or the hill, etc. Other things included on that map are, proximity to landslide prone areas, steep slopes, undermined areas map is a layer that you can turn on this. So this is a very useful tool that's available there at the Pittsburgh GIS site. And these are the data links for the the database files for all of those layers. Provided them here as well. Tree canopy is another one, so you can see how that would impact your stormwater project. So a lot of good information, very useful here for stormwater planning on any given site or larger development for the neighborhoods. The references I cited for the stormwater climate change modeling were folks over at CMU, as I said, and Rand Corporation. The city code and ordinance site here, a link for you, and a host of PWSA stormwater sites are provided here for information that you can get on the Stormwater Fee, the Stormwater Credit Program, as well as that last one there is the map for the fee finder. So you can just click on that, punch in your address, and look at your impervious area on your particular property. Final word on reporting basement backups and flooding. This is something that it's kind of a head scratcher for me, but I guess I get it in some ways. We only know about the flooding when people tell us about it, for the most part. You know, we can't be in every neighborhood at every time during the storm events. So we encourage everyone to, you know, report flooding, whether it's in their own basements or whether it's on their street or down the road at the corner, or if there's catch basins that are blocked. Several projects, and we've seen this time and again. We, you know, have an, you know, some complaints, or we have an idea, you know, we get some news that, you know, there's a need for stormwater management on a particular street at a particular intersection. A lot of times, one of the first things we do is we will go out and survey the neighborhood, talk to the neighbors in that area. Have you had problems? Have you seen this issue? Do you have basement backups? And it's like the number of times people tell us they have had problems is, you know, 5 or 10 times more than what the actual complaints that we get. So I encourage you and, you know, your clients or, you know, your neighbors, tell them to call PWSA's dispatch center when these events occur. Call the city's 311 line. They will then forward it to the dispatch center to let us know when these street flooding events take place or basement backups take place. It's important for us to know this because that informs us on where our next project will be, but it also informs us on how significant the problem is across the city and how much more, you know, we're going to have to, how much more resources we're going to have to invest to know what's going to be needed in the future. So we can't solve the problem if we don't know it's there, and if people don't tell us, it's difficult for us to find out on our own. So please let everyone know to give us a holler when these things go awry and you see these issues out there in the streets. With that, I'll close it out and flip it back to Julie. I thank you all for your time. Appreciate those folks that hanging on here and listen to me go on and on. I welcome any questions that you may have on this stormwater stuff, and hopefully we can answer those up for you. And I will stop sharing now. There we go.
Thanks so much, James. That was so much information, and we really appreciate you going through all of that. Just shows, you know, how much is actually going on with stormwater behind the scenes with the strategic plan, and, you know, why the stormwater fee is so important to us, and, you know, what we're looking to do in the future. So we really appreciate that breadth of topics that you talked about today.
Yeah, I sometimes lose myself in these things when I get started, and there's so much to say, so much that's going on. It's really difficult to sort of winnow it down. I hope I didn't
No, I think you do
too much interest by droning
like
on, but
yeah, we could have a session on like each one of those topics, right? So,
yeah.
thanks so much.
Sure thing.
Pulled out the most important information, and see if anybody has any questions. No need to be shy. I did want to mention while you were talking, I did look up the strategic plan ambassador program. And what that is we're working with Grounded Strategies, if you've ever heard of them. It's a survey. So if you're like a resident in an area that's experiencing, you know, flooding or stormwater issues, they want to hear from you and we want to hear from you. So it's like in the 4 Mile Run area, Nagley and Heath's Run, Soho Run, 21st Street, Homewood, Sawmill Run, Woods Run, Hazelwood, Sheridan. So if you're in any of those areas, you can head to actually groundedpgh.org. And you can take the survey there and let us know what's going on in your area. Does look like we got a question in.
Yeah, so we have how does the new stormwater code, stormwater rates, the storm rates coordinate with storm requirements by DEP and NPDES? When we worked on this, we did, as I said, talk to the folks at DEP. They were a little bit hands off, and they were like, "Look, you guys, you make your code, you do what you want. It's your code, but as long as you know that anything that you do is going to have to, at least minimally meet the requirements that state has or county has." So we were working on that with them to make sure that we did not run afoul of anything that they had in place already. And I think ours is probably a little higher. The rates are higher and more stringent than anything that the state has out there. One of the things we did use from them was, of course, the state's BMP guide on sort of construction and the design specifications for a lot of these recommendations that we're making in the design guide. So that's something that we also use to reference those control measures and what the state has already provided for us in that the BMP guide that they have. And the other question I see is, yes, the presentation, I will give it to Julie, and then her and Jordan can get it out to everybody. So these links will be live for you to go through the slides and click on them.
Yeah, we'll send out a follow-up email. It'll have the presentation, and then obviously we're recording today, so we'll have a video of the presentation as well that we'll share and likely post on our YouTube channel and our website, so you can come back and look at it at any time.
So I think too, just to reiterate, what the involvement we had from the community on all of these issues, these things we talked about, the stormwater master plan, the stormwater fee, and the stormwater code updates, was first and foremost probably the biggest amount of time that we spent on any one of these was getting out to the public, getting out to the folks that have to engage with this code, the folks that are going to pay the fee, the folks that are going to be most impacted by projects, from the planning, and getting their opinions, their thoughts, and their ideas on what was needed and what they wanted to see in this stuff. So I hope that what the way we're headed with this and the transparency we've created will continue, and the involvement of the design and engineering community. We welcome that as we evolve these programs and processes, because that was one of the biggest things that I was most impressed with the code change was when we got our stakeholder group together. It was such a, I don't want to say eye-opening, because I kind of had an idea of what we were getting into, but it was very encouraging to see, so many people with the same ideas, right? And so many people saying the same thing about like, hey, we know stormwater is an issue. We know it's changing. We know that the old ways of doing this aren't going to work in the future. So, we need something that we can sort of put in place that will carry us to the next 25 or 50 years. We're building all this development that's going on in the city of Pittsburgh is going to be here for 25 or 50 years or maybe more. If we build a 5-acre development site to manage stormwater that's calculated from a 2003 model year, that does not make any sense when in 2035 our storms are going to be twice as intense with double the downfalls, right? So I think the development community kind of gets it. The engineering and designers really get it, and I think this stormwater stuff is it's easy to complain about, but it's also something that I think we can, all come together. And when we work at it this way, it is something that we can manage it, and we can get to a point where these things are impactful enough that we start to see the changes. And that's the sort of turning point I'm looking for next, is when do we start to see the changes and the fruits of our labors, right? So I showed you that list of projects across the city, and how soon before we start to see, them making an impact and changing things in people's neighborhoods. So
speaking of, I wanted to mention, we do have a project page on our website that specifically lists out projects that are in planning and in construction. It is pgh2o.com/projects-maintenance. And there you can search and see sort of what's happening all over the city, including water and sewer, not just storm. But, and also what's in your neighborhood, if there's any closures coming up or anything like that. So if you ever have any questions about the projects, definitely head there and see what's going on. And Nancy has another question there, James.
Yeah, so for a building that takes up the entire property footprint, what other ideas can be implemented to reduce stormwater runoff other than green roofs? Yeah, that's one of the situations. Yeah, I agree with you. It's like I was talking about some of these infill developments, in these denser neighborhoods of the city, places where it's really hard to get the proper space that you need for the stormwater storage to do that. Green roofs, one thing, blue roofs are another thing. Stormwater reuse, if there's a way to catch and capture that water and then reuse it, in your gray water systems, something along those lines. Other than that, the volume control offset is an option. If the property owner has another property on a different site, that can be sort of that, like that stormwater management trading aspect is another possibility. And at the end of the day, on the new construction at least, and is the in lieu fee, which the city has sort of the mandate to in the code for that to do a project within the same sewer shed. So when that in lieu fee is paid, that money is then dedicated towards stormwater management, with the priority of doing the stormwater management project either in the same neighborhood, or if not in the same city as where the money, or in the same sewer shed rather, as where the paying property was located.
All right, any last minute questions? Comments? Okay. Well, thank you all for being here and participating. We really appreciate it. Our next session is May 25th, and we'll be focusing on permitting, specifically development permitting, not so much stormwater permitting. And we'll talk through our new online permitting system, City Grows. And then June 8th, that session will be sort of our miscellaneous processes, dye testing, backflow, water conservation, leak detection, maybe some commercial lead line information. And then the final session on June 22nd will be our procurement and contracting session. So hope to see you there if those are of interest to you, and have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.
Thank you.